Hello and welcome to my channel. I hope you enjoy this story. I'm going to try and upload a new story each day. The Mirror's Reflections. Holly Arnold had always been drawn to the strange and forgotten. As a photographer, she sought beauty in decay, abandoned buildings, overgrown cemeteries, and crumbling seaside piers. It was during one of her explorations that she found herself on the Isle of Wight, a place steeped in history and, as she would soon discover, something far more sinister. The antique shop was tucked away in a narrow alley hidden behind a withered wooden sign. The windows were covered in dust, and the smell of mildew and old wood filled the air as she stepped inside. The shopkeeper, an elderly woman with eyes like clouded marbles, sat behind a counter, knitting in silence. Holly had been browsing for only a few minutes when her eyes landed on a tall, ornate mirror, its frame intricately carved with scenes of strange creatures and twisted vines. It stood in the corner of the shop, cloaked in shadow, as if it were trying to hide itself from view. "That one's been here a long time," the shopkeeper rasped without looking up. "Came from a manor house up on the cliffs, you know the one, been empty for decades now." Holly approached the mirror, captivated by its dark beauty. The glass was old, warped, and cloudy in places, but when she looked closely she saw something different. For a moment the reflection wasn't hers. It was someone else, someone who looked like her but wasn't. The figure had hollow eyes, her hair disheveled, her expression twisted in pain. Holly blinked and the image was gone. Her own reflection stared back, her camera slung around her neck, her brow furrowed in confusion. "How much for the mirror?" she asked. The shopkeeper paused, her knitting needle still for the first time since Holly had entered the shop. "You're certain you want that one?" Holly nodded, feeling an inexplicable pull toward the mirror. The old woman sighed, stood slowly, and gave a price far lower than Holly had expected. "It's yours, then," she muttered, almost as if she was relieved to be rid of it. The mirror fit perfectly in the corner of Holly's rented cottage on the Isle of Wight. It was a quaint, isolated place, overlooking the cliffs and the endless expanse of the sea. She loved the serenity, the way the fog rolled in at dawn, shrouding the world in eerie silence. That night she decided to take a few test shots of the mirror. She positioned her camera, set the timer, and stepped back, watching her reflection appear in the viewfinder. For a moment everything seemed normal. But when she reviewed the photos on her camera, her heart stopped. In the photos her reflection was different. In one, her doppelganger was staring straight at her, though Holly had been facing the camera. In another, her reflection was reaching out, her hand pressed against the glass, as if trying to escape. But it was the last photo that made Holly's blood run cold. Her reflection was gone. Instead, there was a dark room, lit only by flickering candlelight. And in the shadows, figures moved human-like, but twisted, their limbs too long, their eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. They were watching her, waiting for something. Holly felt a chill crawl down her spine. She looked at the mirror, half expecting to see those same figures looking in its depths, but it was just her reflection, staring back at her with wide, frightened eyes. She didn't sleep that night. The next few days were a blur. Holly became obsessed with the mirror, taking dozens of photos, each more disturbing than the last. Her reflection would move when she wasn't, or disappear entirely, replaced by glimpses of the dark, twisted world on the other side. One evening, she decided to film it, thinking maybe a video would reveal more. She set up her camera on a tripod, the lens focused on the mirror, and pressed record. As she watched the footage in real time, the air in the room seemed to grow colder. Her reflection stood still in the mirror, mirroring her every move at first. Then, slowly, it began to change. The reflection smiled, though Holly hadn't. It tilted its head, watching her with a strange, predatory intensity. Holly's pulse quickened as the reflection lifted its hand, reaching out toward the glass. She backed away, her heart pounding in her chest. The reflection mimicked her movements, but there was something wrong. Its eyes were darker, sunken, its skin pale and waxy. It wasn't her anymore, it was something else, something from that other world. Suddenly, the lights flickered, plunging the room into darkness. Holly fumbled for her phone, turning on the flashlight. She swung the beam toward the mirror. The reflection was gone. Her heart raced as she scanned the room, the beam of light shaking in her trembling hand. The mirror stood in the corner, dark and empty, no longer showing her reflection. Then she heard a soft, almost imperceptible tapping sound. It was coming from the mirror. Slowly, dread pulling in her stomach, Holly approached. Her breath fogged the glass as she leaned in, her fingers hovering inches from the surface. The tapping grew louder, more insistent. And then, through the fog, she saw her reflection, not in the glass, but behind it. It was pressed up against the other side of the mirror, banging on it with desperate force, as if trying to break through. Holly stumbled back in terror, but the reflection didn't stop. It stared at her, its eyes filled with panic, and then its lips moved. "Help me, the days that followed were a nightmare." Holly stopped taking photos, stopped sleeping, but no matter what she did, the mirror continued to haunt her. Every time she walked past, she saw things that shouldn't be there, alternate versions of herself, twisted realities where the world was darker, crueler. In one, she was standing in a field of dead trees, the sky black with storm clouds. In another, she was sitting in a room lit by nothing but flickering candles, the twisted figures lurking in the shadows, watching her. She couldn't take it any more. She had to get rid of it. Late one night, under the cover of darkness, Holly carried the mirror out of the cottage and down the winding path to the cliffs. The sea roared below, the wind whipping through her hair as she approached the edge. She hesitated for a moment, staring into the mirror one last time. Her reflection stared back, but this time it wasn't moving. It was smiling. With a scream of frustration and terror, Holly hurled the mirror over the edge. It shattered against the rocks below, the sound of breaking glass swallowed by the crash of the waves. For a moment there was silence. Then, slowly, Holly backed away from the cliff, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She felt a strange sense of relief. It was over. But when she turned to leave, her blood turned to ice. Standing at the edge of the cliff, watching her, was her reflection. Its eyes glowed faintly in the darkness. And it was smiling. Holly Arnold was never seen again. Some say she left the Isle of Wight, driven mad by whatever she saw in that cursed mirror. Others whisper that her reflection finally caught up with her. But the mirror was never found. Some say it's still out there, waiting for its next victim, reflecting not what is, but what could be. After Holly Arnold disappeared, rumors spread across the Isle of Wight like wildfire. The locals spoke in hushed tones about the photographer who had been consumed by her own reflection, swallowed by the strange and sinister forces lurking behind the glass. The cottage she had rented was left abandoned, no one daring to step foot inside, fearing what they might find or worse, what might find them. Months passed, and the story of Holly Arnold became little more than an eerie legend, a cautionary tale whispered by the island's fishermen and pub patrons on stormy nights. But one person had not forgotten. Alex, Holly's closest friend and fellow photographer, had received Holly's last, frantic messages. They had been cryptic, filled with nonsensical ramblings about mirrors, alternate realities, and figures watching her from beyond the glass. Alex knew Holly too well to brush it off as mere paranoia. She had always been rational, skeptical even. Something real had happened to her, something no one else wanted to acknowledge. And so, one chilly October morning, Alex boarded the ferry to the Isle of Wight, determined to find answers. The cottage stood at the top of a cliff, just as Holly had described in her messages. The wind howled through the jagged rocks below, and the sea foamed angrily against the shore, a constant, haunting backdrop. Alex shivered, though not entirely from the cold. There was an eerie stillness to the place, an unnatural quiet that seemed to press down from all sides. The front door was unlocked. Dust hung in the air, undisturbed for months, and the scent of dampness and neglect filled the room. Alex immediately noticed Holly's camera on the small table by the window, untouched since she had vanished. Alex turned it on, scrolling through the photos Holly had taken. At first, they were normal landscapes of the island, a few shots of the cottage, and then the mirror. The mirror. Just as Holly had described, her reflection in the photos was wrong. It was out of sync, its expression twisting in ways that shouldn't have been possible. In the last series of photos, Holly's reflection wasn't there at all, replaced by the dark, candlelit room and those unnerving figures watching her from the shadows. Alex felt the chill, but something kept them glued to the camera. They had to see more. But the photos ended abruptly, leaving only questions. What had happened after? Where was Holly? The cottage itself seemed devoid of answers. Every room was undisturbed, save for a faint trace of footsteps leading from the living room to the door. Alex retraced Holly's final steps, the weight of the mystery growing heavier with every passing second. Then, in the corner of the room, something caught their eye, scratches on the floor, as if something heavy had been dragged. The mirror, perhaps. Holly had thrown it off the cliff, or so she had said. Alex's gaze drifted toward the window, overlooking the jagged rocks and the sea below. With a sense of dread, Alex left the cottage, determined to find the spot where Holly had supposedly destroyed the mirror. The cliffs were steep, the wind biting at Alex's face as they approached the edge. The rocks below were sharp and treacherous, jagged teeth ready to swallow anyone foolish enough to get too close. But there, among the rocks, Alex saw something small, shards of glass glinting in the sunlight. The mirror had shattered just as Holly had said. But why did Alex feel like it wasn't over? They crouched down, inspecting the shards. Most were small, but one larger piece remained mostly intact, its surface warped and cracked. Alex hesitated, their fingers hovering over the glass. Then they saw it. In the reflection, standing behind them, was Holly. Alex spun around, heart pounding in their chest. But there was no one there, only the endless expanse of cliffs and sea. Slowly they turned back to the shard, heart thudding in their ears. Holly was still there. But it wasn't really her. It was the same twisted version, with sunken eyes, gaunt features, and a hollow, eerie smile. She was trapped, her hand pressed against the inside of the mirror's surface, just as Holly had described in her final photo. Alex felt a wave of nausea, fear creeping up their spine. Holly, Alex whispered, their voice trembling. The reflection didn't respond, but her eyes seemed to lock onto Alex's, as if begging for release. Alex felt compelled, drawn to the shard in a way that defied explanation. Against every instinct, they reached out and touched the surface of the glass. The world around them warped instantly, the sky darkening as a cold wind whipped around them. Alex stumbled back, but the shard seemed to pulse with energy, dragging them closer. The figures Holly had spoken of, the twisted, shadowy beings from the other side of where they now, their forms flickering in and out of the reflection, watching from the darkness. Suddenly the shard cracked, and from its surface a low, guttural sound echoed, as if something far beyond human comprehension had stirred. Alex yanked their hand back, the mirror piece falling from their grasp and shattering completely against the rocks. The reflection of Holly, of that thing, was gone. But something else was happening. The ground beneath Alex's feet began to vibrate, and the air thickened, heavy with the sensation of being watched. Slowly they turned to leave, but standing at the cliff's edge was someone. It was Holly. Or at least, it looked like her. The figure stepped closer, its movements unnaturally slow, deliberate. Her face was expressionless, her eyes empty voids. "You shouldn't have come," the figure whispered. "It's too late." Alex backed away, but the figure kept advancing, the air around them growing colder. Alex felt trapped, the cliffs on one side and this twisted version of Holly on the other. They didn't dare look at the sea, afraid of what they might see reflected there. The figure's lips curled into a cruel smile, and behind it more figures began to appear, twisted shapes, eyes glowing faintly in the encroaching dark. "You are one of us now," and as the world around Alex darkened, swallowed by the alternate reality that had claimed Holly, they realized the truth. They were doorways. And now the door had been opened. The Isle of Wight remains quiet, but there are whispers of a photographer who vanished without a trace, leaving behind only a camera and the strange, broken shards of an antique mirror. Some say if you look closely into the broken pieces, you will see them, Holly and Alex, trapped on the other side, forever lost to the twisted realities looking just beyond the glass. And sometimes, just sometimes, the mirror calls for someone new. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story. Please don't forget to like, and even better, like and subscribe. Thank you very much, and I hope you have had a great day.